David vs. Goliath is one of the oldest stories in the world, told over and over again in many different ways. Wrestling is no different, with some being excellent and some being What happens, however, when David is 23-year-old Will Ospreay, still years away from his peak, and Goliath is 61-year-old Vader, whose best days in the ring were at this point behind him? In this video, we'll look at how Will Ospreay vs Vader as a match that actually happened came to be, how the match got booked in the first place, and what happened when the bell rang. I'm going to be using quite a few sources, including some first-hand accounts, including Revolution Pro Wrestling owner Andy Quildan, as he's the man responsible for booking the match, and he communicated with both Ospreay and Vader. He's vital to the story, and he told his side in his podcast in 2019. The story begins with a match that occurred in New Japan Pro Wrestling on May 27th, 2016, on day 6 of that year's Best of the Super Juniors tournament. Will Ospreay would face Ricochet in a match that would have everybody talking and would create a storm of mixed opinions. The debate all centered around a sequence early in the match, where the two men would present a highly choreographed routine filled with reversals, misdirections and counters, ending with the two performing stereo backflips into a superhero pose like you would see in a Marvel movie. To call the match polarizing feels a bit of an understatement. At the time, it felt like everyone had to have a strong opinion one way or the other. You had to either love it or despise it, and nothing in between. Even industry veterans were weighing in with their take, with the real winners being Ospreay and Ricochet, who had everyone talking about them. Speaking in an interview with High Spots in August 2016, Ricochet said of his matches with Ospreay that they had created much debate over what wrestling even is when it happened, which is a nice way of saying that it caused a row or 20 on Twitter.
I think it's a conversation that people have been wanting to truly have for a while and not really had the way to. When he was like, it's a shame that this is what wrestling has become. It's like, what has it become? Like it can be anything you want it to be. If that's not what you like, then that's fine. But I mean, and I think that's pretty much what I said.
One surprising individual who chimed in online was a man who was no stranger to New Japan, a former IWGP champion and WCW World Champion. A man who had his own history of causing controversy in Japan, having been part of a riot in Sumo Hall in December 1987 by destroying the beloved Antonio Inoki in the ring. The man they call Vader was none too impressed by the clip he'd seen going around social media, and made his opinion very much known. From looking at Vader's original tweet, his main criticism was built around the sequence more resembling a gymnastics routine than a contest. We're not going to get bogged down in the argument here, but it is worth pointing out that in that 50 or so seconds clip that went viral, Vader technically does have a point. Whether you can apply that point further though, is where the argument comes in. Though Vader said he saw the full match in a tweet, we can't be sure if he ever actually did. We can't even be sure if that would have changed his opinion either, given how many other known figures in wrestling were also offering their opinions. At least I did doubt that, until I heard Vader talk on an episode of Conan's podcast later in 2016. For what it's worth, Vader himself told Conan that he originally sent out his tweet largely to be a contrarian to all those he was seeing heaping praise on Ospreay and Ricochet.
It was taken the way I meant it to be taken. I wanted to create heat. I saw this kid on, and you know, right now and for the record, forevermore, I saw Will Ospreay working, and I went, my God, there's the future of wrestling. Damn, first thing I want to do is, what, talk good about it? No, everyone's doing that. Everyone's kissing this guy's ass like he's the, you know, the heir apparent to wrestling. And so I thought, I'm gonna shoot him down and see what I can create. So I shot him down what I thought was valid critique, because what they were doing, and if you look at that match honestly, they were spot monkeys. They just do spot after spot after spot.
Not one to take criticism quietly, Will Ospreay responded a day later, noting that he respects Vader, but didn't appreciate what he said. According to Will in his High Spots interview, this tweet in particular offended him and made him want nothing to do with Vader. Over the next few days, he would also respond to positive comments from the likes of Jim Ross and the Road Dogg, even at one point noting how he didn't want to draw any attention to any of the negativity, which was definitely out there also. He was, however, playfully needling the legend by using the Vader bomb in his matches in New Japan, even using the hashtag Vader Fears Ospreay. Will was at the time developing a bit of a reputation for making the most out of what his critics had to say. To show you what I mean, in the following year, Rip Rogers, another veteran and well-regarded trainer in his own right, tweeted out a notes-app rant about what he perceived to be every indie match, with one of the main criticisms being the repeated use of dives. This caught more attention when Randy Orton posted with apparent agreement, only accompanying Rogers' rant with ... dive. Ospreay wasn't about to let this go unchallenged, quickly having new merch made simply saying dive on it. This wouldn't be the last time Will would get in a public spat with a WWE roster member though. On Vader's side, he was very much up for debating the many fans who came back at him. While he'd made the point that he thought Ospreay and Ricochet were talented, Vader still stood his ground on his point. He even responded to Will using the Vader bomb, accurately pointing out that it hits a bit differently when you're 400 pounds. After what would end up being a few weeks of going at each other on Twitter, and going at it with the fans, the two would start to consider the prospect of having a match together. Before we go any further, let's take a look at the careers of both Vader and Ospreay in mid-2016, as their paths were very different. Vader's last match before this had been 11 months earlier, at the Tulsa, Oklahoma Fairgrounds. His opponents that night, the Steiner brothers, who I imagine weren't an easy night at the office even at their ages. The last time WWE audiences would have seen Vader was at the Hall of Fame ceremony earlier that year, where he inducted one of his most famous opponents, Stan Hansen. As far as I can tell, this might have been Vader's final WWE appearance, only being inducted into the Hall of Fame himself in 2022, 4 years after his passing. Weirdly, his last time wrestling on US television would be in June 2015 for Impact Wrestling, where he would face Bram, also known today as NWA's Thomas Latimer. A few times, Vader would team up with his son Jesse White, who had been in WWE development for a while, using the name Jake Carter. A match with someone on the up like Will Ospreay then might well have been what Vader wanted, to get the fans talking about him again, and maybe the match might have stopped them complaining at him. While you could say that Vader was on the downturn, certainly from his glory years, Will Ospreay was very much on the way up. He began 2016 as the champion of London-based Progress Wrestling, a title that he won as part of a long built-up storyline, and was his biggest achievement to that point. Well, that, and being a two-time Lucha Britannia World Champion as the masked Dark Britannico. In early 2016, Ospreay also wrestled for Impact on their UK tour, and Evolve, making himself known to the US promotions already. On July 12, 2016, Will was present at an event put on by Inside the Ropes, the opening night of a speaking tour with guest Paul Heyman. On this night, in a clip that would make its way around online, Paul would call out Ospreay by name and bring him onto the stage. Paul would present Ospreay with a contract that would make Evolve Wrestling his US home, that company having been founded by his former ECW employee Gabe Sapolsky. Ospreay was also promised that signing this contract would not affect his New Japan commitments. While this made for a fascinating moment, and it still is considering we're looking at very much a WWE guy in Heyman, standing next to someone who has never been there. Will had previously worked for Evolve earlier in the year on WrestleMania weekend, but would only ever have one more match for them in 2018, electing to sign with Ring of Honor instead, who had a working agreement with New Japan. Despite the Evolve offer, Ospreay's biggest breakthrough had already happened not too long earlier, one that would eventually lead him to global recognition. On October 3rd, 2015, Ospreay had wrestled Kazuchika Okada at Revolution Pro Wrestling's Global Wars event. Rev Pro, as it's known for short, had a link with New Japan which still exists to this day, and this is how the match would take place. Okada, as well as Hiroshi Tanahashi, who was also on the card that night, recommended the young Ospreay for New Japan, and he would make his in-ring debut in April. If you're curious, Tanahashi would face Big Damo, the future Killian Dane, who wouldn't receive such a recommendation. Just a few months later, Ospreay would take part in his first Best of the Super Juniors. Will would actually go on to win the whole tournament, but this has become a bit of a footnote compared to the waves that his match with Ricochet made on day 6. On May 30th, after a few days of debating, Vader seemed to have had enough. He would tweet, "It's been a great 3-day holiday, let's pretend this never happened." If that's how things actually went down, this video might be ending about now, don't look at the runtime. Over the next couple of weeks, Vader would continue to respond to fans. Admittedly, the discourse around the topic wasn't exactly helping things to calm down. You also have to consider the personalities of the two people involved. As I noted, Will wasn't one to back down, but neither was Vader. According to Will Ospreay speaking in an interview with Highspots, he even says that he eventually had to block Vader, but the fans kept drawing his attention to Vader calling him out so much that he had to unblock him to see what Vader was saying. He does note though that he may have partaken in a bit of trolling too, not just using the Vader bomb in matches, but allowing his opponents to kick out at 1. Once the back and forth had run its course, Will Ospreay says that Vader contacted Will himself, asking him for an email. It was in a private exchange that Vader clarified that he had no real issue with Will, and he would ask for a match.
The moment he was like, "Will email me, we've got to talk," I thought generally he was like, we would fucking have it out, like as fucking men, like, do you know what I mean? He was like, "I've got no problem with you, I want to do a match, I think we can sell this place out, yada yada yada, what do you think?" I was like, "Cool, yeah, let's do it."
It's hard to know exactly when this took place, as Will doesn't specify, but publicly both men raised the possibility of a match on Twitter on June 17th, 2016. Will was the first to tweet about it, saying, "Just throwing it out there, I would absolutely love to face Vader. People think I hate him, but I don't. I genuinely want this match." Interestingly, a lot of the replies seem to be all for it. Remember that, because it'll become important. Later that day, in Boulder, Colorado, Vader offers a similar sentiment, tweeting, "At this point I'm curious if you guys would pay to watch this match, Ospreay vs Vader." Coincidentally, this happened to be the same day that Rev Pro promoter Andy Quildan sent Vader an initial email, presumably to the address that Vader had been tweeting out days earlier. He also says that at this point he had already run it by Will, who was enthusiastic about the idea. Realistically, this match seemingly could have taken place anywhere, as Will was very well travelled by this point, competing for at least 25 promotions that year alone, and hardly any of them wouldn't have booked the match between him and Vader. Well, PWG maybe might not have booked Vader. The honour would eventually go to Revolution Pro Wrestling, as Ospreay had worked there since 2013, when the now 13-year-old company was just 6 months old. From Andy's perspective, he'd already booked a big run of events in York Hall recently, a dream match between Zack Sabre Jr. and Kurt Angle in June, one of his biggest annual events of the year, Summer Sizzler in July, where Zack would face Katsuyori Shibata, and now saw an opportunity to continue his momentum into August. He also saw an opportunity to take advantage of a trend that was going on at the time.
And I had been looking at a lot of MMA, right? And it was around the time that Kimbo Slice was drawing like absolutely ridiculous numbers for Bellator, or I guess he was with at the time. And they were essentially freak fights, which were kind of like, you can't build a business on it, but there's interest. And they drew, right? And I was like, you obviously can't build a territory around it, and I had no intention of doing that, but I was like, if there's a market for something, why not try and capitalise on it and take advantage of it?
One interesting thing that Andy notes is that Vader had asked for what he called a package deal, which essentially means he wanted a rematch and potentially more down the road. On the same show where Vader vs Ospreay would happen, Andy also booked Ricochet against another British star on the rise who he wanted to build up as a heel. Enter Pete Dunne, who Ospreay had feuded with recently over the promotion's Cruiserweight title. We'll get into Andy's booking plans a little bit more later, but looking to build up some of his current roster members off the back of this story, Andy was laying the groundwork for a potential tag team match of Ospreay and Ricochet against Vader and Dunne. Pete would even have a Vader-style singlet made, which despite the tag match never happening, he would wear in the ring on indie shows. Dunne would introduce the singlet in the ring during a 6-man tag that Ospreay was also a part of in January 2017. Will would react by clocking him in the face. In March 2024, on an episode of Talk is Jericho, Will Ospreay had a less polite way of wording it.
For me, it was like a horrible experience, because he's not the nicest chap in the world, but like I don't want to speak any of him because he's passed on now, bless him, and he's someone's dad, like all the best to the family, but he wasn't very nice to me. But like all in all, it was wonderful for what it was. It was probably at the time my biggest one match payday. So like it was really fun, like looking back on it, and it's a good story to tell the boys. But it's just like, you know, he wanted a free match clause. He wanted to do like free match. I went, fuck off. Like, what more of a story can we do out of this? Do you know what I mean? It's the one match. You're getting your payday. You're fucking off.
Yeah. After several weeks of back and forth emails between Andy Quildan and Vader, some of which he reads on the podcast, it seems that Vader would start to get impatient with Andy, tweeting this even before Andy had had the chance to announce the match officially. On the morning of June 26th UK time, Rev Pro would officially announce the match for Uprising on August 12th, just 6 weeks away. While the replies to the initial tweet don't seem all that critical, Andy doesn't remember it that way at all.
You know, people are like, people be careful what you wish for, and like someone like actively got really angry at me on Twitter. And there was some people who were like literally saying to me, like, I can't wait for this to go wrong, so it teaches Andy Q a lesson.
There were fans that were not only revolting against Rev Pro, but directing their complaints directly at Andy himself, openly telling him that they hoped the show would fail. There wasn't much hope of that though, with over 1,100 tickets gone a month away from the show, and just 10 left a couple of weeks before. By the night of Friday, August 12th, every ticket for York Hall was gone. Not all of the planning for the event was a success though. Andy talks in the podcast about wanting to plan a special event the day before, where Will and Vader would debate in person before the match, and fans would get the opportunity to take a photograph in between the two. Shockingly, there wasn't much demand for fans to stand next to Vader, who famously never washed his gear, even in his more active days. While I'm joking, the real reason that the face-to-face was cancelled likely had something to do with it being announced only a couple of weeks before the show, with not a lot of time for fans to add it to their plans, on a weekday as well. One more quite interesting thing that Andy talks about before we get to the night of the match are the conversations that he and Vader would have on the phone. The way Andy described it on a podcast in 2025, he became Vader's best friend for a few weeks. Andy said that he and Vader would talk for hours, mainly about his long and varied career. Around this time, Mick Foley had written Vader a foreword for his autobiography that he was working on, and Vader was so proud of this that he read it on the phone to Andy not once, but twice, killing any kayfabe that might have been left. He also says that Vader would compare Will Ospreay favourably to one of his greatest opponents, that being Sting.
Right, and we had a conversation where he discussed in great depth his admiration for Will, and he likened him to Sting, and he said, like, I just wish I could have faced him, you know, in my prime, because you know, he's the type of babyface I love working with.
Vader had plenty of ideas for their match that were reminiscent of his and Sting's classic matches in WCW. Andy also claims that Vader would, in the lead up to the match, send Andy photos of him training, with the intent of showing that he was getting into shape for the match. All of this fell through though, when Andy would receive some correspondence from the airline to the contrary, requesting a wheelchair for access in the airport. This brings me back to that package deal that Vader wanted for at least one return match. Andy Quildan would say that any potential plans for a future rematch would go out of the window once Vader arrived in the UK, and he was more physically limited than he'd been letting on.
So Vader arrives in the UK, and he's in a bad way when he arrives. He's got chronic back pain. He had to be wheeled in a wheelchair from the airport to the check-in. He could walk, but like, one thing he wanted was a doctor when we got there. And that's when I knew we were in trouble, because I was like, you know, if he's in this much pain, how on earth is he going to get through this match?
And so, we finally get to Uprising on August 12th, 2016. The card was very much stacked, with Ricochet vs Dunn and a British heavyweight title match where Zack Sabre Jr. would defend against Jeff Cobb Mateo. And just so you know, if I left that WWE reference in, I was feeling brave. Part of the intrigue of the night was always going to be what Vader looked like walking into York Hall. When Vader had wrestled for Impact a year earlier, he bore very little resemblance to the mastodon he used to be presented as. Andy tells us that not only did he attempt to get Vader to bring that f***ing massive helmet he used to wear, but he also attempted to convince Vader to try his best to turn the clock back a bit.
So the big thing I said to Vader was like, listen, because I'd seen pictures of him in his tracksuit bottoms wrestling on the indies.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, I want...
You've got to look like Vader.
You've got to wear your gear. And I was backstage, and I saw him, full gear, and I was like, that's Vader. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's just huge, right? He had his singlet on, like, just a full Vader regalia, the mask, everything, right? And he came out for his match, and he had this t-shirt on, right? And I'm thinking he's going to take it off when he gets in, right? And he doesn't.
Okay.
Right? And he's got a hole in the t-shirt as well, which I think really adds to it. So he's got the full gear on underneath, but he's got this t-shirt on over the top, and I just wanted to be like, take the shirt off, mate.
Yeah.
And then he got in the ring and he faced off with Will Ospreay. I know he finds it hard to breathe in that mask, right? Because he pressed down on his nose. But he went face to face with Will Ospreay. First thing he did when they were facing off with each other, he pulled the mask off. And I was like, oh, because then that's another part of Vader gone. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
So Andy says that Vader was walking around backstage looking the part, but he was mortified when the man himself came out through the curtain wearing a ragged t-shirt with holes in it. And even more so when the first thing he did was remove his famous mask. It didn't matter to the 1200 in York Hall though, who gave Vader a monstrous reaction and gave their local hero an equally fitting welcome. Vader is the first man to enter to his WWE theme. From the moment we hear his voice at the start of the song shouting "It's Vader time," loud chants of "Fuck you Vader" can also be heard. Vader requests the microphone as he would like to cut a promo, and if you look closely we can see Andy, who's also the ring announcer, turn him down initially. Vader is persistent though, and Andy relents, something that looking back he says he was happy about after hearing Vader. To be honest with you, I don't blame Andy for the skepticism.
Whatever, but Vader comes over to me, he's like, can I cut a promo? I'm like, nope, stay away. From my perspective, I'm like, he's not in sync with what this audience wants or needs.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And he's like, and then I think I ignored him, and then he's like, Andy, I promise you, let me cut the promo, I'll keep it short. And then he got on the microphone and he basically said some catchphrases and ended with it's time, it's Vader time. And it was absolutely perfect.
Okay.
And like afterwards he was like, I told you, didn't I? I told you about that promo.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank you. But he was spot on with what he did, and I'm glad that he persisted in getting the microphone from me.
Ospreay doesn't do his regular flashy entrance, choosing to pace right down the walkway to stare down his online rival. The prevailing opinion of most who saw the match, Andy included, seemed to be Ospreay got him through it. But what does that mean exactly? The two begin fighting before the bell is rung, and when referee Chris Roberts tries to stop this, Vader shoves him down, meaning the match doesn't actually start yet. This allows the action to spill out of the ring immediately, possibly even breaking Triple H and Undertaker's record from WrestleMania 27. Security tries to hold Vader back, which buys Ospreay some time to get a running start off the ramp, launching at Vader and what would become a pile of other blokes. The two battle back up the walkway, and Vader chokeslams Ospreay off the ramp and onto a platform at Andy Quildan's feet at commentary. As Vader lurches back to the ring, medics check on Will, even putting him in a neck brace, teasing that the whole thing is over before it's even had a chance to begin. Despite all advice though, Ospreay throws the brace off and crawls to the ring. He pulls himself under the bottom rope, then to his feet, and the match officially starts. The chaos before the bell allowed Vader to continue at his own pace while Will recovers from the previous attack. Ospreay takes a rather slow beat down for a few moments, until he's able to come back with a handspring kick that the crowd roars for. He then hits a springboard off the top rope and nearly floors Vader. Interestingly, given how this whole thing came to be, it takes Vader a fair while to get his first pin attempt, which is ironic really. Vader argues with the referee's count, leading Ospreay to dropkick him into the ref, knocking him down again. As Will climbs to the top rope, Pete Dunne's music hits, and he attacks from the crowd. Pete levels Ospreay and shakes Vader's hand as the crowd boos. This allows Ricochet to run in, coming to Will's aid, and we even see the two double team Vader, which is a rather insane image when you think about it. The match is complete carnage at this point, with Dunne and Ricochet brawling outside the ring, but the crowd are very much into it. Vader hits a chokeslam that Ospreay kicks out of at 1, but he doesn't kick out of a second. Vader actually defeats Will Ospreay, but there are plenty of reasons why. To put it more accurately though, Will Ospreay doesn't lose the match, but Pete Dunne wins it for Vader. The show ends with Ricochet and Andy Quildan checking on Ospreay, while Pete Dunne helps his new dad up the stairs of the entranceway. It seemed to many curious that Vader would get the victory, but as you might expect, there's a story to that. Andy claims that until the week of the event, Will Ospreay was supposed to win the match, but eventually Vader had other plans.
He kind of agreed to it, but then was like, we can kind of talk about the details more later. And then as time went on, he was like, I've been thinking about it, and maybe instead of doing like him going up on me with a pinfall, maybe I can get disqualified or counted out. It wasn't like when he landed, he's like, I'm not doing the job. If you know, pay me more money, or it was nothing like that at all. It was like maybe 2 days before he flew. So obviously there was nothing that could be done at this point, but he was just like, you know, I'm not happy, I'm not comfortable with jobbing, like I think it will affect, and again, it seems ridiculous in even saying it, but he's like, I think it'll affect my legacy, you know, people want to see me beat him up, and like people, like, in his mind, Vader would be a pussy if he's talked a load of shit, and then when it comes time to cash a check, he can't cash the check, forgetting the fact he's like 62 years old, and, you know.
Once Vader had left, and the crowd had finished chanting that was bull***, Will Ospreay takes the microphone. He tells the crowd that he might have failed them, but he was coming for revenge against Dunne. He also makes time to tell them not to expect a rematch, and given what he said on Jericho's podcast years later, he clearly meant that. However you feel about the match, the fact that it was booked, or the fact that Vader won, at least Rev Pro had the foresight to try and get Vader's heat onto someone else, and use that to build to a later match down the road. A match that cleverly, Vader didn't have to be booked for. After Uprising 2016, Will Ospreay's career would continue to rise. 2 weeks later, Will would have another match with Pete Dunne, where he would retain the British Cruiserweight title. He would end the year with a very brief run as Ring of Honor Television Champion, a 2-day run in fact, winning and losing the title during an ROH UK tour in his debut for the promotion. He would start 2017 by competing for the first time in the Tokyo Dome, but brace yourself, it wouldn't be one of the epics he'd become known for. At Wrestle Kingdom 11, he would, along with Jado and Yoshihashi, lose a match for the never openweight 6-man tag team titles. He would avenge this loss and poor placement on the card by winning the junior heavyweight title in the Dome the next year. Having won the 2016 Best of the Super Juniors, the next year Will would win his block, but lose in the final to Kushida. Later in the year though, he would win a rematch and his first title in New Japan, his first of 3 junior heavyweight titles. But what of the rest of Vader's time in the UK? On Andy's podcast, he goes into quite a bit of detail about some of the Comic-Con appearances that were lined up. These were apparently set up with Steve Linsky, a British referee who became Vader's handler of sorts, whether he wanted to or not, for the next leg of the tour. Vader would end up missing some of the dates he was advertised for, mainly because he and Steve never really got on. On August 14th, 2 days after Uprising, Vader would actually wrestle a second match in England for XWA in Essex. Vader would defeat this bloke, Sid Scala. The side feud between Vader and Sid Scala is an interesting one, in that it was clearly and shamelessly attempting to latch onto the back of the original story. Scala, in character, was attempting to cash in, and would upload to social media a video of him approaching Will Ospreay outside of York Hall. Sid tried to convince Will to merchandise some rather naff looking Vader masks, and he would continue this in more videos and on Twitter, which would eventually enrage Vader enough to want a match with him. This is, as far as I can tell, the only other wrestling booking that Vader had in the UK at this time. Andy notes that after Vader missed some of the Comic-Con dates and trashed the hotel room he'd been staying in throughout, it was time to send him home to Boulder, Colorado a little earlier than planned. Andy's 2019 account of what happened, as well as his brief retelling in 2025, are very entertaining listens, so I recommend you check them out yourselves with the link in the description. I've only played you the bits necessary to tell the story, but Andy goes into a lot more detail. The story doesn't quite end there for Vader and Rev Pro though, as the big man begins making claims that Andy, the company, and Will Ospreay ripped him off. On October 22nd, 2016, Vader would take to Twitter to rant about Ospreay and Quildan, claiming that part of the deal they arranged was that he would receive the master tape to be able to sell in the US. In the podcast, Andy is very dismissive of this claim.
The only other thing that happened of note afterwards was he obviously kicked off about saying that he didn't get the footage of the match, because I said to him he could have the footage of of his specific match, and I was like, I've sent you the footage, you've just not done anything with it. So I sent him an electronic version of the footage, which is you can see if someone downloads it. So I said to him in the email, I was like, listen, here's the footage, click this link to download it. As soon as you download it, there'll be like a receipt. I sent you an electronic receipt saying that you've downloaded it, but he didn't bother downloading it. No. So I don't know what he was trying to, the controversy he was trying to stir, but so that happened as well. But I just wanted to kind of make it perfectly clear that yes, I did agree he'd have a copy of the match, and I did send it to him, but no, he didn't do anything with it.
Judging by many of the tweets I've shown in this video, Vader doesn't seem the most computer literate, so this may be a case of Andy fulfilling his end, but not in a way that Vader understood the deal to be. At the start of his podcast, Andy explains that he had no regrets over the way things panned out, though he was absolutely ready for it to be done with by the end. The phone conversations he and Vader had in the weeks leading up to the match really show a different side of the Mastodon than otherwise presented, until a Dark Side of the Ring episode in 2025 at least. In that documentary, much was said of Vader's crippling self-confidence issues. He also says that Vader outright told him that he was lonely. It's hard to believe that a man known for being so imposing and monstrous would struggle with such issues, but Leon White evidently did. Looking back many years later, Andy made a very interesting point that got me thinking. The match between Vader and Ospreay got people incredibly invested in who was going to win and who would lose.
To an extent, people do care now, but not passionately, not to the stage where there's going to be uproar.
Winning and losing matches when we were kids was the be-all and end-all.
And for that one night it was as well.
Yeah.
There are only a few more modern examples of this, like Cody trying to finish his story. Times like this, when the fans passionately care who wins and who loses, feel really rare and special these days, but Vader and Ospreay created one. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.